So, what would you do if you suddenly found yourself orbiting Saturn? Did you answer die, probably? Yeah, same, I get that.
The game has been rigged, forget all the rules. Stop believing what you're told. All this hate that I feel for you, my one true enemy. Once was blind, but now I see. It makes me question why.
So Observation is a bit of an odd game. And I would consider it horror for a few reasons, but it's also kind of an adventure puzzle style game, and it doesn't play at all like you'd think. I guess the best thing I could compare it to is kind of like those old point-and-click adventure games where like you don't really control the characters directly, you just kind of guide them where they're supposed to go and solve puzzles. It's kind of like that, except it's done in 3D, and, well, you're on a space station. In space. That's usually where a space station would be, I agree. I probably got a little redundant there, but just bear with me here. So, you're on the space station called the Observation, and you're dealing mostly with a character named Dr. Emma Fisher, who finds herself in a pretty wackadoodle situation where suddenly horrific vibrations are shooting through this international space station. She can't find the rest of the other crew, nor can she contact ground control, and when she finally gets a sense of the space station's position, she realizes that instead of being in low Earth orbit where they are now orbiting Saturn! What? That's kind of where the horror comes in. I mean, there are some other elements, mostly due to the evil hexagon, but this is like a terrifying situation in context. I mean, think about this for a second. So, like, astronauts and cosmonauts, people that go into space, are already taking a pretty big risk. You have to consider the fact that the only way to get into space, as of right now, is using rockets. And rockets are basically controlled explosions. So you have to strap yourself into this craft that is utilizing a controlled explosion to propel itself up into miles high into the atmosphere, and then traveling many miles per hour in order to maintain the orbit that they're set with. And the notion of receiving any kind of rescue in the event something goes wrong is pretty difficult once you're in that kind of situation. And that's just low Earth orbit. That's still within physical sight of the planet Earth. You can see it. You can look at it and say, hey, that's home. In the context of this game, you are now orbiting Saturn, which I should probably stress is 984.27 million miles away from Earth. You know, horror in space isn't exactly a new thing. I reviewed plenty of games with that theme. Obviously, when it comes to movies, I mean, Alien's whole thing was that in space no one can hear you scream. But I would actually argue that in the Alien situation that crew found themselves in, it was arguably less terrifying than this one. Because at least there, it was set in a future where there are actually interstellar ships that travel through deep space on the regular. Like, that's normal in that environment. The Observation as a space station was never, under any circumstances, meant to traverse beyond Earth's orbit at all. And now it's suddenly orbiting Saturn. There's no way to, first of all, wrap your brain around the situation, let alone stage any kind of survival situation. Like, even in a situation where things go bad with more, shall we say, familiar technology, like The Martian, which was a great movie, by the way, even there, not only did Matt Damon's character have the benefit of being on solid ground, yeah, it was Mars, but it was solid ground, but he also had plenty of tools left over from Earth, and ways he could contact Earth, and they could figure out how to actually get him off an alien planet. Observation was never meant to be around Saturn. And that's the situation that Dr. Emma Fisher is in. This is terrifying. just as a concept. But don't worry, you aren't playing as Dr. Emma Fisher, or any, human on-board observation. That's one of the weirdest things about the game. You play as Sam, and Sam is the onboard AI computer. You're playing as the computer on board the observation, looking through various cameras in order to solve puzzles and gather data on the situation. From the get-go, some kind of force, the evil hexagon, is manipulating Sam. Because Sam seems to understand that somehow it is responsible for bringing the station this far out into space. Quite how it did that, no one is sure, including itself. But you still have to help Emma figure out what's going on and potentially save the rest of the crew. But things only continue getting weirder. The whole hexagon thing is actually based off of an actual storm that is, as of now, still occurring on one of Saturn's poles. It's a perplexing anomaly that was revealed to be on Saturn by the Voyager space probe mission. For some reason, the storm tends to be shaped like a hexagon. As for why it's able to generally maintain such a precise shape, there's a few theories for that, and none of them in the real world have anything to do with aliens, just so we're clear. But in the game, it seems to have something to do with aliens. And, you know, I actually kind of applaud the idea of not only setting a science fiction game within the confines of real space technology, like, yeah, we're in space, and yeah, this is a much larger space station than the current ISS, but it still utilizes tech that, generally speaking, is within our reach, and we actually have right now, outside of perhaps the advanced AI. Plus, it's utilizing a known anomaly on Saturn, so it's kind of tying itself to real science, at least in some way. Not completely, obviously, but this type of grounding in some level of reality makes the narrative, while it is crazy, somewhat believable. There is some mystery going on here, definitely. There's obviously things that are happening that we could not possibly hope to understand, but the fact that the tech and the stuff you have to do in order to keep the people on board observation alive is utilizing real-world science is kind of enjoyable, actually, especially for me. Most of what you're going to be doing is interacting with the various systems on board observation, and this is generally where it forms your puzzle base. You have to gather data because Sam's memory has been corrupted, and once you gather certain data shards, you can combine them, and then utilize them to solve various puzzles, and some puzzles you don't even need to do that for, you just kind of have to figure out how certain things work. Visually, the game isn't exactly anything special, at least when it comes to character models, but the actual environments are top tier, and it really helps immerse you in what looks like a real space station. Additionally, the music is haunting, because, again, this is all horrifying. Whatever's happening here is scary to the people on board, and the game does a really good job of making you feel their fear, even though you yourself aren't actually, well, I guess you are in danger as Sam, since you are on the observation, but you're not really alive. You're an artificial intelligence. But now we're bringing up the question of whether or not AIs are living beings. Does this unit have a soul? Please tell me, Tally Zora of Us Normandy. I just need to know. But that's besides the point. The mystery actually only deepens as the game goes on, as more and more crazy nonsense starts happening. I can't exactly tell you all that without spoiling it. The game really isn't that long, but the story is so good that I almost prefer it, because it doesn't overstay its welcome. Some people don't like short games because, you know, the longer a game is, the more you've justified in buying it, which I get. And sometimes it's good for a game to be long, but when it comes to observation, I don't know if I'd want to be playing it for like 50 or 60 hours. The narrative is long enough to be interesting, but not so long that you get bored of it. Because the gameplay is rather simplistic because, again, all you're doing is maneuvering cameras around. You do have the ability to maneuver within the space station using these spheres that Sam can control, and in that way you can kind of explore. But even then, it's still pretty simplistic. Again, you're not a real person maneuvering around this zero-G environment, you are the AI on board observation. Going outside the station and looking at the damage is actually pretty scary, and the voice acting is top tier, making you really feel invested in all the characters, even the ones you don't ever really get to meet because they're dead, because a few people are already dead. I won't tell you which ones, but, you know, you kind of expected that. It's a surreal experience, and it's thought-provoking. It's one of those stories that still doesn't really have an answer, ultimately, when it comes to what exactly happened. It's clearly drawing from, like, 2001: A Space Odyssey there, where there was a lot of questions that even in the context of the story, it wasn't really explained. I suppose the difference here is you're playing as the AI, and you're not necessarily corrupt, you're just being influenced by something. The evil hexagon! Is there anything wrong with the game? Well, sort of. The only thing I would ever complain about when it comes to this is that it is pretty easy to get lost or put in a situation where you aren't exactly sure what to do. You can always ask what the request was that you're supposed to fulfill, but even then it's not always clear, and that is part of the puzzle aspect. But when you're kind of wandering, trying to figure out exactly what room you're supposed to be in, that can be a little confusing. Fortunately, the map system is very in-depth and does have a waypoint system, so I wouldn't say it's necessarily possible to get lost. It's just possible to not be 100% sure on exactly what you're supposed to do. There will be a lot of looking around, there will be a lot of trying to learn things, there will be reading and listening to audio logs and things like that, but in a way, I actually kind of prefer that out of this kind of game. That's part of the mystery, that's part of learning, that's part of understanding what the situation is. There aren't a lot of games that do it this way anymore. Most modern games kind of spoon-feed you all this stuff on a silver platter. Like, you're not really expected to look around that much, or read hardly at all. It's just one of those things. Maybe that's just me, I just feel like a lot of games don't get this kind of almost old school, like the old point-and-click adventure games, like Observation does. It's definitely not a point-and-click style in that regard, but it does have some similarities when it comes to how it's controlled, since Sam, for the most part, can't directly interact with anything physical on the station. He can only control things that are connected to the electronic systems, like the doors, for example. Outside of that, it's not like he can go over and pick up a cup off the table or something, because, well, he has no hands. He's not a person. He's a computer. So it kind of puts you in a weird role, almost. Something that, again, not a lot of other games do. Even when you play as a robot in a game, usually the robot is some kind of humanoid, or something to that effect. In this regard, you are literally software. You have no physical form to yourself beyond your main central hub. And even then, that's arguably only to run Sam's personality, not be the personality itself. Again, it's a very thought-provoking narrative, and it's actually one of my favorite games in recent times. If anything I've told you so far sounds interesting to you, I implore you to give this game a shot. I don't think it's full price. I don't think it ever has been full price due to the length. I'm not 100% on that, but I know it isn't now. And you can pick it up on PC, PS4, and Xbox One. So with that, till next time, this is Darkness, Individual Alafon, farewell.
The game has been rigged. Forget all the rules. Stop believing.